love it. So my parents are here tonight. Hi, Mom, and they think the story is about them. So here goes. So I realized I really screwed up, and I wasn't even sure how. I was 26 years old and teaching at a conference in Lithuania. It was about 5 years after Lithuania won its independence from the Soviet Union in 1995. I had asked my students a question, and it seemed like they stopped breathing. Their bodies stiffened in their desks, and their eyes stared straight ahead, right past me. It felt like fear had just walked in the room. After a full minute of silence, a student finally spoke up. She said, "We are not yet able to consider such questions." I didn't even know what I did until I learned later that night when I had dinner with my friend Rita, with Rita, who was one of the other American teachers, also teaching at the conference. Rita was older, and she was a young girl in Lithuania during World War II. And she lived through the Russian occupation at the beginning of the war, and then also Hitler's occupation that came soon after. And she told me what that was like. And she said that when the Allies were about to win the war, her family risked everything to escape because they realized the Russians were coming back. And she said they escaped and they risked everything because the Russians were worse than Hitler. And I had read my textbooks in school, and I knew that nobody was worse than Hitler, so I didn't know what she was talking about. But thankfully, I just shut up, and I listened to her story. She said what changed most when the Russians came was her mother. Her mother became so strict. It wasn't just the regular stuff like follow the rules and show respect. It was things like don't wear bright colors and don't draw attention to yourself. It was things like don't ask questions and don't state your opinion. It was things like don't smile because a smile could be misinterpreted. She made sure all her kids knew that the Russians were listening and watching even when they weren't in the room. She kept the curtains drawn all times of day, all times of the year, in case a Russian soldier was walking by and he would see something that he didn't like. Rita told me that Hitler killed the Jews, but the Russians killed everybody. By some accounts, in the first and the second Russian occupations of Lithuania, the Russians killed a full third of the Lithuanian population. And this was just one story. I knew there were other stories, and I knew the story of a Lithuanian Jew would be very different than Rita's story, but I still felt so humbled, like all this book learning I'd done didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything unless I listened to people's stories, unless I heard and felt just a little bit of what it would be like to be a child who is taught not to smile, or just a tiny little bit of what it would be like to be a parent, to make a decision for the family when either choice would likely end up with everybody dead. So I still, to this day, I listen for stories because there's a truth in a person's story, just one person's story, that you can't find in a textbook with just the names and the dates and the places. So back to that morning in the classroom, Rita's story also taught me what I did wrong and why I terrified the crap out of my students. The class I was teaching was an informal class. It was supposed to be fun, and I could pick any topic I wanted, and I just happened to have one of my favorite books with me, and it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s Why We Can't Wait. And my favorite part of his book was his letter from the Birmingham jail. And if you remember, this was his response to criticism that he was deciding to go ahead with demonstrations when the permits had been denied by the government. I read the whole letter to the class, including these words. There are two kinds of laws, just and unjust. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. One also has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So then I followed up just casually, like no big deal. Hey guys, what do you think? Can you be morally justified in breaking the laws of your government? And I asked this to people who had lived most of the past 50 years under Soviet and Russian rule. And I asked it just a few years after there would have been a bug in that room, or there would have been a spy, there would have been a report, and there would have been consequences. So for my next informal class, I decided I would be at least a bit less terrifying, and so I picked the topic of the Beatles. And I told them about the Beatles, and I played their music, and I explained all 4 Beatles and what they were like and who was cute. And then I asked them another question. I said, who is your favorite Beatle? And they smiled, these little tentative smiles, because this is a question they could answer. According to public school Lithuanian educators in 1995, the answer is Paul. Thank you.